This is 𝗕𝗂𝗶𝗁𝗃 from Trezor University, and today I want to answer some listener questions. I'm calling this Your Bitcoin Security Questions Answered, and this video will make a lot more sense if you also watch yesterday's video, which was about Bitcoin core devs, Luke Dasher's Bitcoin being stolen, and all the issues surrounding that, surrounding hardware wallets, etc. So I'll link to this in the description notes below. And the majority of these questions were taken from comments to this video. It seemed to engender a lot of conversation. The first question comes from Sean. He asked, do you think storing my seed phrase on one password and use Electra makes sense? As someone who travels all the time, I'm not sure where to put everything. I'm going to have to say this again and again and again, I think, for the rest of my life. It's still a good question. I don't mean to belittle the questioner. I'm going to have to shout it all in caps. Never, 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 never store your private keys or recovery seed online or in the cloud. It's very important to remember that the cloud is not something magical. It's just someone else's computer or server. So you should never store your 12 or 24 word recovery seed or your private key in hexadecimal or binary. You should never store this in an Evernote note. You should never store it in a Google Doc or an email. Never take a picture of it and upload it to your phone. And also never store it in a password manager. This is just not the appropriate place to store things. I don't know that much about 1Password. It looks like it's highly encrypted, etc. And the company claims that they don't have access to any of this information. This is very similar to what we saw from LastPass over the past few years. The problem with these centralized password managers is they seem to always end up getting hacked. I can't tell you technically what happened with LastPass versus how 1Password does their stuff, but I don't think that you should be trusting these centralized solutions. It's one thing to trust them for an email password, even a bank account password, where it's a little more difficult to move your money unless you have two-factor authentication set up or something like that. But for a Bitcoin private seed, private key, or recovery seed, if someone gets access to that, your Bitcoin will be swept from that address immediately. And as such, I think it's much more dangerous thing to store in a password manager. If you're going to use a password manager, you still should not store your recovery seed there or your Bitcoin private keys there. But Bitwarden is a decentralized solution where you're not giving your data to a more centralized honeypot. So I'd encourage you to check that out if you're not already using it. Please hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying this video so far and you want to help support my mission of Bitcoin education for the world. So the next comment from this video was a comment question. Never say, in this video I was saying that when you're working on your recovery seed, when you're generating it, when you're writing it down, you should never say it out loud. And this is because many people have Alexa devices or Siri listening in their house or Google listening devices, etc. And first of all, this is something you should get rid of. You should not have these corporate spy devices in your house listening to everything because everything's being logged. But this person said never say your 12-word recovery seed out loud. Spy devices could hear you. Lol. Can't tell if this is satire or not. Do you think Bezos is going to steal your Bitcoin by using Alexa to listen for your keys? Again, I'm not worried about Bezos stealing my money. He's not even really involved with Amazon. He's very wealthy. But this is not intended as satire because we have these listening devices. We have to assume that they are logging everything. And if there's ever a hack at Amazon or Apple or Google or whatever other microphone database is storing all this stuff that they're listening to in your house, this could end up being released and shared on the dark web or on ClearNet. So it's very important not to ever say your recovery seed out loud. You just, in this day and age, you don't know who's listening. There may be a workman at your house whose cell phone is listening and he doesn't know it and you don't know it. And so a lot of things can definitely go wrong. When you work on your recovery seed, put your phone in another room, put tape over your desktop or laptop camera as an added security precaution, and never ever do anything with your Bitcoin in a public space like a McDonald's or a Starbucks or other restaurant, which is full of listening devices and cameras like any other public space today. If it's not the company listening to you, it may be the phones of patrons there or the cameras on their laptops. This is a pretty old picture of Mark Zuckerberg with tape over his webcam and over other parts of his computer. So this is something that he obviously takes seriously, and he's very good at stealing people's personal information and selling it to advertisers. So you can be sure that this is something that you should be worrying about as well. The next question I got was, would it have been smarter for Luke Dash or Luke Dash Jr. to store his Bitcoin in many different places? In other words, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I think that's true in general, but in the case of Bitcoin, it does make things that much more complicated. If you have multiple baskets of eggs, instead of just worrying about one basket, you have to worry about many baskets. And complexity, as Luke discovered, is usually the enemy of security. It seems like he had a fairly complex setup compared to a simple hardware wallet. Complexity is the enemy of security simply because we're all human. And if you had just machines doing all this, that would be one thing, but we interact with our security devices and our hardware wallets, and it's easy to make a mistake, especially with computers, which are very complex systems. And so you want to try to keep things as simple as possible. And so if you store your Bitcoin in many different places, that could work out, but it also could be a problem. The problem is if you're using multi-sig, so let's say you're using a single 3 out of 5 multi-sig address to store your Bitcoin, and this really is the gold standard or the Bitcoin standard of storing Bitcoin, where you need multiple keys to move the Bitcoin. So 3 out of 5 multi-sig, it would mean that there are 5 keys available, maybe 5 hardware wallets or 4 hardware wallets and 1 software wallet, for example. And then you need 3 out of those 5 keys in order to send or spend the Bitcoin. But if you're using 3 out of 5 multi-sig address, which is really how you should be storing large amounts of Bitcoin, either 2 out of 3 multi-sig or 3 out of 5 or some permutation of this, even that setup, if you're using 3 out of 5 multi-sig, that setup's going to require 5 hardware wallets, presumably, 5 recovery seeds, which back up those 5 hardware wallets, and then 1 configuration file that shows the derivation path and all these other things that you don't have to really understand, but you do need to be able to store that. So that's 11 items that you need to store safely. And so if you have your Bitcoin in different baskets, you're going to have many items that you need to keep track of. So in this case, it might just make more sense to put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket really closely. I can't remember who said that. I think it was Rockefeller or some other American billionaire. Another question we got from that video about the Bitcoin devs, Bitcoin core devs, Bitcoin being stolen. Luke had mentioned that he had seen some funds, some of his Bitcoin, some of his funds flowing from CoinJoin to the receiving wallet. He mentions it right here that there was CoinJoin to this address. Now I did report this in yesterday's video, but I was unable to find any evidence of it on chain. Luke mentions this CoinJoin, but I couldn't find it on chain. It's very easy to spot a CoinJoin on chain. It looks something like this, where you have equal inputs and especially equal outputs. And so I'm going to link to this wallet where all the stolen Bitcoin ended up. You can click on here, you can see the different paths, and maybe you'll find some evidence of something that looks like a CoinJoin, but I was unable to find that. I assume Luke knows what he's talking about if he's saying there was a CoinJoin at some point, but I was unable to find it. Next question, can you actually trust hardware wallets like the Trezor, the Blockstream Jade, and the Coldcard? These are my favorite hardware wallets. And I would say yes, they are currently the best solution available. We don't live in a perfect world, nothing is perfect, but I think hardware wallets, both for billionaires and for millionaires and for everyday people who have a lot less than $1 million, I think this is a good place to store your Bitcoin. And you can minimize the trust involved in these companies that make these hardware wallets by using only open source hardware wallets like Trezor, like Coldcard, and like Blockstream Jade, so that you can be sure that there are many eyes on the code. This is why you want it to be open source code. So there are many eyes on the code looking for malware and backdoors, software and or hardware backdoors. And if you can't do this yourself, at least if you're using a popular wallet that has a lot of eyes on it, someone will hopefully catch these malware problems. So Blockstream Jade is purely open source hardware wallet, as is the Trezor, as is the Coldcard. The Coldcard has a secret element in the center, but it still manages to open source its code, as this article mentions. I would avoid Ledger wallets for the reason that their firmware is not open source. They also have a bad history of getting hacked. So there was a Ledger data breach. This was not a breach of hardware wallets, but this was a breach of personal information of Ledger customers. It was leaked in July of 2020. It's ended up on the dark web, and lots of people have been receiving fake hardware wallets in the mail. And as a result of this, there are a lot of people on the dark web now who know how much Ledger owners, the names and addresses and maybe phone numbers and emails of Ledger owners. So this is a problem. And then they can send you a quote unquote replacement hardware wallet to your address, and you plug it in and you enter your seed phrase, and it sends it to the attacker, and you've lost all your Bitcoin. So I think in general, you don't want to use hardware wallets that have closed source firmware or software. The next question is, how do we know that Trezor or Coldcard or Blockstream doesn't have a copy of the words provided to us when creating a new wallet? This would be the 12-word recovery seed or the 24-word recovery seed. The answer is that these things are generated locally inside of your hardware wallet, the private keys and recovery seed, and they're never transmitted over the internet to Trezor or Blockstream or Coldcard. How do we know? One way of knowing is you can check out the open source code. You can check out the Trezor GitHub page if you can read code. Otherwise, you do need to trust someone who can read code. But we have to understand that these are businesses that are operating on a profit motive. If they did something wrong like this, it would instantly end their business. And so the question is, can they run off with enough Bitcoin to make it worth completely blowing up their businesses and the trust in their business? And I would say that this is a balance. Of course, you can never be sure, but I think the fact that there's open source code and that there are these certain corporate profit incentives means that this is highly unlikely to happen. In order to get these security guarantees, though, you should always buy your hardware wallet directly from the company. Never buy it from a third-party seller who might have stuck some malware on there, and certainly never ever buy a used hardware wallet. You can get a decent hardware wallet for anywhere from $50 to $150, and so it depends on the amount of Bitcoin you're storing. If you just have $50 or $100 worth of Bitcoin, it might not make any sense. You can just store it on a software wallet or a hot wallet on your phone. But once you begin to reach numbers that are significant to you, so again, this depends on your own cash flow and your income and your net worth, what a significant amount of money is. But for example, whatever you would store in your savings account, that would be a significant amount of money. And this is the point at which you should consider buying a hardware wallet, especially if the cost of a hardware wallet is a small fraction of the holdings of your Bitcoin. The other thing, you should treat your Bitcoin as if it's already worth 10x what it is. So if you have one Bitcoin now and it's worth about $16,000, $17,000, you should really learn how to treat it as if it has already appreciated, because it certainly has that potential, and I think it definitely has that future. So one Bitcoin, you should treat it as $1 million coin, or at least $170,000 coin or $500,000 coin for this cycle. And it's important to learn these things while Bitcoin is still fairly cheap, so you don't do your first transaction, your first hardware wallet thing when you're dealing with a Bitcoin that's sitting there on the exchange and it's worth $2 million, and you really don't want to mess it up at that point. So it's good to practice these things, and it's actually quite easy to withdraw your Bitcoin from an exchange. You'll see people on Twitter who say you should never use a hardware wallet. People like 𝗚𝗂𝗶𝗁𝗲 saying you should just leave your coins on FTX or leave them on an exchange. I think this is very, very bad advice. Hardware wallets, there could be a rug pull at some point in time. If you're using multi-sig and you're using different vendors for the different keys, this is much less likely. But the fact is that the vast majority of Bitcoiners who've lost their Bitcoin have lost it by holding it on exchanges like Mt. Gox, Quadriga, FTX most recently, or centralized lending services like Celsius, BlockFi, etc., Gemini Earn in this last cycle. They haven't lost it from a hardware wallet rug pull. And so don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Use a hardware wallet, buy a Trezor, Coldcard, or Blockstream Jade. Again, I'm not being compensated. I don't work for any of these companies. I'm receiving no compensation, but I've used all three and find them to be useful. So get yourself a hardware wallet if you don't have it already. Generate a 12 or 24 word recovery seed. A 12-word recovery seed has enough entropy that it's fine. It will protect your Bitcoin. And then what you can do is you can even wipe the hardware wallet. You can erase it as long as you have that recovery seed, and then you can always repopulate it when you want to sign a transaction. And then you have to be certain that you can store that recovery seed safely. And one good way of doing it is to use steel plates. You can just Google steel plates for Bitcoin private keys, and you can see a number of different companies. There's nothing very high tech about these. These are just steel plates that you can stamp your recovery seed into in case your house is flooded or burns down or something like this. And if you want to learn more about multi-sig, I will link again to this video that I've linked to many different times, talking about exactly how it works, as well as talking about how to do it for yourself and also how to do it with collaborative custody with companies like Unchained. The only change I would make, I believe I mentioned 𝗕𝗶𝘁𝗂𝗍, in this video, and I can no longer recommend them because they now offer Ethereum support, which is a huge distraction, makes their company much less secure as well, because now they have to deal with running an Ethereum node and all the mess that that entails. So don't use Casa. Unchained is a good collaborative custody solution. And then you can also create your own multi-sig vault as well. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Those questions are really helpful and allow me to really gauge where everyone is and what are some of the very common questions so I can make videos like this. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.